Yes? Thumbs up. Okay. You're in the right space, the Zoom room. We are excited to have a good and rich conversation with you this afternoon on Unit 2. We'll do introductions, have you do introductions, and then get to what you really wanted to do. So my name is Beth Ratway. I'm a senior technical assistant consultant for the American Institutes for Research. Sue?
Sue Leeson, Senior Justice, Oregon Supreme Court.
I'm John Deloach. I'm the senior staff attorney for the South Carolina Association of Counties.
Okay, can you introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, judges. We are Unit 2 from Grant High School in Portland, Oregon. My name is Henry Kanzler.
I'm Annalise Quinton.
I'm Christopher Bianco.
I'm Willa Gagnon, and this is our teacher, Miss Dee Pasquale.
Thank you. All right. Question 1 is what we're working on this afternoon. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? We're ready when you are.
When the 55 delegates, similar in status and occupation, met in the Pennsylvania State House, consensus seemed achievable. However, when the Delaware delegates refused to accept any form of proportional representation, the convention split into 2 camps: the unlikely big state Deep South alliance in favor of proportional representation, and the small states, prompting the first and greatest disagreement at the Constitutional Convention. Madison was bolstered by his Southern allies. Madison was initially confident that his plan would succeed. However, the small states mounted staunch opposition. Roger Sherman of Connecticut proposed a compromise: a lower house with based on proportional representation, and an upper one with 1 vote per state, resolving the first disagreement of the convention.
Inseparable from representation was the second major disagreement at the convention: whether slaves, who made up 40% of the Southern population, would count for legislative apportionment. The South wanted slaves to count as a full person to increase Southern power and protect slavery. Northern delegates, such as Elbridge Gerry from Massachusetts, disagreed, claiming that slaves were property, not people. Ultimately, the delegates narrowly agreed to count slaves as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of taxation and representation. None of the delegates came to Philadelphia motivated to abolish slavery, leaving the issue unresolved and ultimately allowing the institution's continuance. The Constitution's protections for slavery encouraged its expansion in the South. At the dawn of the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history that claimed over 600,000 lives, almost 4 million people were enslaved in the United States.
The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments finally addressed slavery and began to resolve the issue of citizenship. However, the Black Codes, followed by the Jim Crow era and the continued oppression of Black Americans, prove that the consequences of slavery still impact our nation. Another unresolved issue with wide-ranging consequences has been the extent of executive power under the Constitution. While the convention carefully enumerated Congress's power in Article 1, Section 8, they left the president's power ambiguous, vesting them in Article 2, Section 1 with all executive power. President Jackson's forcible deportation of tens of thousands of indigenous Americans, Japanese internment by executive order under President Roosevelt, and President Nixon's secret bombing of Laos and Cambodia during the Vietnam War exemplify the consequences of a failure by the framers to clearly outline the powers of the president.
We support amendments that would modernize our Constitution to ensure its relevance to our constantly evolving nation. First, we would amend the Electoral College to require proportional allotment of electoral votes in each state, similar to Nebraska and Maine, placing the election of the president more firmly in the hands of the people. Second, an amendment that guarantees the right to vote without hardship would increase voter turnout and prevent voter suppression. Further, we support amendments that rein in the president, such as one requiring congressional authorizations for use of military force to expire after 2 years. Finally, due to increasing politicization of the Supreme Court, we support instituting 18-year term limits for justices to decrease the long-term impact of the appointees of a single party. The Constitution belongs to the people. The delegates gave us a framework of government that we now have the responsibility to amend. Thank you, and we are ready for your questions.
Thank you. John?
I want to touch on your amendment to modernize the Electoral College to allow for or to require proportional electoral math based on the state's vote total. Do you think, given the necessity for getting 3/4 of the states to ratify any amendment, do you think you would get the ratification by states like California and New York, where certain cities hold a much greater sway over the state totals than other states? Would you get their support?
I think it's definitely possible that we would, especially because if it were by constitutional amendment, all states would be required to fall into this category. For example, California, New York, as you mentioned, also states like Texas. And for this reason, it wouldn't really confer a partisan advantage. It wouldn't confer an advantage necessarily to any of these states. And for this reason, it's much more likely to pass than, say, an amendment that would do away with the Electoral College in its entirety. This is really a realistic change to the Constitution that could actually be ratified.
Further, by still allowing it, we're allowing smaller states to not give up the power that they currently hold in the Electoral College, but just ensuring that everyone has the right to vote. By requiring proportional allotment of electoral votes, we may actually see that proportional voting is generally more accepted in larger elections. And a recent Pew Research study found that any form of proportional voting, such as ranked choice voting, and as well, increased voter turnout by 8%. So by adopting this, we may actually see a greater voter turnout in other elections.
And Go ahead.
And this doesn't have to be done entirely through constitutional amendment. It could be done on a state level, such as Nebraska and Maine, which have already implemented this.
The Electoral College reflects the same kind of compromise that the Connecticut Compromise affected. So are you going to tell me next that we need to undo the Connecticut Compromise as well?
I think that one way to look at the Connecticut Compromise would actually be look at some of the other proposals that work to achieve the same purpose of reserving state rights in another body. One is through Charles Pinckney of South Carolina, who proposes a bucket system, which would allot states 1 to 5 senators. So it would be based on proportional representation, but it would also still have, it would be smaller than the House and allow states to still reflect their distinct interests in that body.
Are you advocating that?
I do think that a proportional representation in the Senate from seen by Charles Pinckney would be something to consider to remove the great discrepancies between the population votes that we see.
So then the next practical question becomes, given Article 5 and the requirements of the amending process, how in the world do you get the required votes for such changes?
The simple answer is that you couldn't. This sort of vote would require that small states give up pretty much most of their political power in the Senate and for the presidency. And specifically, if we're talking about the Senate, Article 5, the entrenchment clause, expressly forbids amending away equal representation in the Senate. If we're talking about amending away the Electoral College, that's not necessarily an issue. But getting rid of the Senate in its entirety would be subject to that portion of the Constitution.
However, the Constitution could also be amended through ratifying conventions in which the people are directly represented in conventions formed at the states. And this may be a way to go around the power held by the states that they want to preserve in the national government and get the direct input of the people who may be in favor of a more proportional system in the Senate.
You lost me on that. English translation for Sue.
The ratifying conventions, like they had at the after the convention at Philadelphia, they sent it to state conventions, and these were directly representative of the people, not organized by state legislatures, which means that the opinions of the people might be more in favor of proportional representation on a
I see your
national level.
point. Thank you.
I'm muted talking to myself and my dog. So all I hear is amendment, 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 except Henry, you did say, maybe not. But you do say in your opening presentation, we had 3 amendments, but there was still legislation that stopped what what we wanted to happen with the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, right? It still continued after that. So are amendments really the answer for these things?
Amendments are certainly not the only way to achieve what we're hoping to achieve. By, for example, instituting 18-year term limits is actually something that is currently in legislation seen by Congress member Ro Khanna of California. This legislation would allow for, would not go against Supreme Court justices' life tenure that the Constitution provides, because it would, after 18 years, that justice would be moved to a senior level, so they would no longer be directly on the bench. And so a junior justice would then be there, and that senior justice could be there for advice and also assist in opinions. And so this achieves our same goal without requiring a full amendment.
Wouldn't it be
And-
safer to rotate them back to a circuit or a district court? Because the Constitution doesn't say you get a lifetime appointment to any given court. You're going to wind up with a Supreme Court building filled up with old people still trying to rule from the. Anyway, just a thought.
That certainly might be beneficial because it would remove sort of that
Yeah.
large number of opinions that would eventually accumulate, which could
Mhm.
sort of dilute at least the decision-making process of the court. But keeping sort of senior members as an advisory role might have its benefits as well. Allowing these people with more experience than newer justices to weigh in on complex opinions and perhaps give that wisdom to perhaps younger newly appointed Supreme Court members.
And
I'm laughing because I'm not sure it's wisdom as much as it has become ideology. Can you imagine Antonin Scalia advising an Obama appointee? Oh, never mind.
Henry, were you going to say something?
yeah, in a way we could change the Electoral College to proportional representation without a constitutional amendment.
Yes.
Already in process is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which around 26 states have already agreed to. And this would, if we got enough states that added up to 270 electoral votes, they could essentially override the Electoral College by agreeing to cast their votes to the National Popular Vote.
So what do you folks think about whether it's better to try to do things through constitutional amendments or use these more political approaches to working within the constitutional framework?
Well, the first major disadvantage to amendment is that it's hard and it takes time. The last constitutional amendment was in 1992. And in fact, that amendment was one that James Madison had proposed back in the ratification of the Constitution. So may I finish my thought?
Just a
No.
sentence.
Legislation ultimately might be more practical.
What a way to end on that one. Thank you very much, everyone. Really good conversation. And we'll offer you some feedback. John, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you for a really well-reasoned presentation, well-reasoned arguments. Your responses to our questions were excellent. You thought about what the advantages and disadvantages to anything would be. And certainly when you're talking about things like the Electoral College and the total representation between big states and small states, like that, those are the hot button issues that have been debated for 200 years.
Sue?
Well, first I owe you an apology, but it's going to be couched in the form of the highest compliment I can pay you. We are here to ask you questions and to judge you. And I found myself having a conversation with you. That's probably the highest compliment I can pay. What I love is your mental agility, your willingness and your ability to think as we converse, and to know the subject matter well enough that you can jump from topic to topic without being flummoxed in any way. And that is really a pleasure for us to get to engage with. So, but I apologize for not keeping my role more of one of just asking questions and waiting for your answers. The place where I guess I will push you some more a little bit is, remember, these people came to the convention representing sovereign states. And this issue of state sovereignty has not gone away. The role of the states in the federal system has not gone away. Proportional or even the national popular vote through interstate compact is still going to run into that wall that America can't get past, which is the urban-rural divide. And I just don't know how we address that. We can't just say, hey, everybody move to the city. Probably the better answer is all of us move to the country. But that's the dilemma that I just can't see us overcoming. It just seems to be ingrained in who we are as a people, and it may be an intractable problem. Anyway, thanks for a great conversation.